Increasingly, more and more of our lives are transitioning to the online world. We post about our accomplishments on our Instas, our accomplishments on our Finstas, send risque photos through our local lumberjack, or to our local lumberjack, and of course, conduct all manners of financial transactions online too. Most of us either don't consider the implications of sending out so much of our data to the internet void, or do consider but feel fairly secure in doing so. After all of these sites have us log in with their username and passwords, and I, for one, am fully confident in my choice of login credentials. For the most part, things sort of just work, except when they don't, but I think it's increasingly important for everyone to at least have a passing understanding of some cybersecurity principles, at least at a high level. You probably know to keep your passwords private and to have them be fairly long and somewhat complex, bonus points for avoiding common English words. But do you know why this is the case, and do you know how companies protect or should protect your passwords? That's what I hope to cover in this video. Remember, this is not security advice, nor am I a security professional. I just like the code. This is definitely a massive oversimplification. If you're actually deciding any sort of crypto system, please do your own research. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it. Let's start at the basics. What is a password? I think for simplicity, we can define them as a sequence of letters, numbers, and/or special symbols like percent or hashtag that are kept secret and used to prove that you have access to the account you're trying to log into. I hope I don't have to convince anyone that they need to be kept secret, and having someone take your password without your consent would be bad news all around. For example, if someone stole my Google password, they could go through my search history. Which, let's be honest, I'd rather they just take my bank password. So that's why most sites will not display password characters as they're being typed, opting instead for black dots, to keep it away from that awkward friend that stares over your shoulder constantly while you type. But this security is superficial at best. We still have a big problem. For the website you're visiting to log you in and prevent others from logging in as you, they need to store your password so that they can check that you typed in the correct one. But we just mentioned that no one except you should know your password. So you might think, oh gee, I trust Facebook, they've never done anything sus before. Okay, so maybe not. But they already have access to all my data anyways. Why do I care if they know my password? So yeah, this has some validity. A lot of your data might be stored in insert company here's systems as what we call plain text, meaning that people at said company might be able to access your data even if they needed to or wanted to. This isn't always true though. There is something called end-to-end encryption where your data actually wouldn't be readable without your password, even by the creators of whatever website is in question. But throwing all that aside for the moment, even assuming that employees working at Company X have full access to your data, whether at bulk or at individual granularity, you still wouldn't want that company storing your passwords, because what happens if they're hacked? Data breaches happen all the time, and if Company X stores a list of passwords of its users, then if or when a hacker manages to force their way into Company X's servers, that hacker would then be able to log in as any of X's users. Just hacking into Post Photoshop's Only LLC Incorporated TM would be bad, and hackers would get lots of user data. But if they were to get the passwords to the site, then they could impersonate your favorite influencer and post content on their behalf, for example. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the Next Big Thing LLC Incorporated TM. We've reached a bit of a conundrum. We need a system where our users can create passwords that they can later use to prove that it is actually them and not some rando down the street impersonating them. And we, as Next Big Thing LLC Incorporated TM, need to be able to verify this. But we can't store their passwords. So if Bob creates an account with username Big Chungus and password uncrackable password, but we can't store the fact that user account Big Chungus has password uncrackable password, when Bob next tries to log in with his username password combination, how are we supposed to know that it's actually Bob? We weren't allowed to record his password anywhere, remember? There are a lot of ways we could store Bob's password without storing the actual characters of it, via some sort of encoding. Let's say we as engineers on this new glorious endeavor in online influencing are trying to store passwords, but want to provide some measure of security over just storing the actual phrases that are given to us. We might have the brilliant idea of using some sort of cipher, that is, have a mapping of the alphabet such that each letter maps to some other letter in the alphabet, thus scrambling the password. We might make all A's X's and all C's in the original messages to G's. So Bob's incredibly secure passphrase, uncrackable password, would look something like this. According to this transformation, we would have defined. Congratulations, we have just invented a form of the Caesar cipher, named after bigwig backstab boy Julius himself. Clearly this cipher wasn't good enough if he ended up like this. So ciphers like this can both be reverse engineered and inverted, meaning that there's a way to go from the ciphered text back to the original form. So if a hacker hacks into our system and he just nabs a list of ciphered passwords without knowing what our table of mapping looked like, he wouldn't be able to just go backwards. But there are plenty of statistical methods that can be used to determine what the mapping likely was. And in the scenario that the hacker walks away with both the list of passwords and this table of mappings, because remember, if we're using this table, it's stored somewhere. And if the hacker gained full access to our system, it stands to reason that he would be able to find this table too. So given this table, it's a joke to go back from the ciphered password to the original password. Okay, so this is no good. So what now? This is where some particularly brilliant math tomfoolery comes into play. Let's take a stroll back memory lane to the wonderful world of middle school. I'm in 7th grade algebra class, it's early in the morning, I can't focus. Of course, 13-year-old me's mind was probably either replaying the cool 360 no-scope I saw the other day, or wondering why I couldn't take my eyes off that girl sitting 4 desks away. Mrs. Zegas is up by the blackboard teaching about functions, and predictably, I'm not paying attention. Now, if I'd played less COD and stopped daydreaming about girls, I could have started my foundation for understanding cryptography right then and there. As it stood, I was never going to be able to successfully pull a 360 no-scope anyways. Or ask a girl out. So you might remember from middle school math that functions look something like this. So you might have f of x is equal to x squared. So this over here is your input, and then whatever this evaluates to is your output. More generally, a function can take any number of inputs and spit out some sort of output. So you could have f of x comma y is equal to x squared plus y. Or you could have some sort of function that takes in an input and it executes a sequence of instructions. So maybe it asks your good friend Kathy what she thinks about x, and then whatever she says, it spits out that answer. You might also remember that functions oftentimes have inverses. So for example, if we were looking at f of x is equal to x squared, this guy's inverse, oftentimes denoted as f with the superscript -1, is actually going to be square root of x. And you can verify this by a sort of litmus test just by testing different inputs. So over here, f of 2 is going to be 4, 2 squared, and f of 3 is going to be 9, 3 squared is 9. So over here, if we take f inverse of 4, well, the square root of 4 is 2, and the inverse function of 9, the square root of 9 is 3. So the input to this makes an output. That output, as the input to the inverse function, gives the original input. That sort of makes sense. Not all functions have inverses defined. Functions that don't have any inverse defined for them are known as one-way functions. One way because you can only go from the input to the output, but you can't go backwards, at least not easily. So something to note here, though, is that just because a function is one way does not mean that there's no way for an attacker to find the input given any output. So for example, let's assume that we have some magical function g of x. This is a one-way function, so there is no g -1 defined. And for simplicity's sake, let's say this function only has a very limited input space. The numbers are 1, 3, 5, and 7. Very arbitrary, and let's just say that g of 1 is 213, g of 2 is 7, g of 3 is 429, and g of 7 is 0. These are very arbitrarily chosen. There could be some complex relationship or set of rules determining or underlying this, but maybe not. So now let's say that an attacker is given the number 429. So he knows that this is g of x. This attacker wants to find out what is X? So he doesn't have access to this information. He doesn't know this mapping over here, because if he knew the mapping, it would be very easy. But if he knew the input space, he could just iterate through that space successively, right? So he could say, well, what is g of 1? Let me see. So it's 213. That's no good. What is g of 2? Okay, that's 7. No good. What is g of 3? Aha, that gives me 429. And so that is the 429 I was looking for. So now he has found that 3 was the input, or in this case, the password that generated the output 429. Even if you don't know the input space, you could just iterate over all the numbers, which we usually will denote with this R symbol. So you could just start g of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and let's say 4, 5, and 6, they just give some nonsense output, or they give a negative number or something like that. And you could just keep going, basically, until you find the correct answer. This idea of one-way functions is exactly how websites, apps, and programs are able to store your password without actually storing your password. They leverage any one of many different one-way algorithms that take as input a password text and spit out as output a long, seemingly random sequence of characters. This garbled mess is then what's stored on company servers. Let's prove to ourselves that this method of storing passwords, with some large caveats, both works and is secure. Given the fact that we are using some magical one-way function, it's relatively easy to see that this is perfectly secure. Given some passphrase, let's say password 123, we run it through our magical one-way function. This spits out some seemingly random sequence of characters, and we store that and forget Bob gave us password 123. If someone were to hack Next Big Thing LLC Incorporated TM's servers, well, they'd just get this garbled mess as Bob's password. Of course, they can't use this to log in, and they can't, by definition of one-way functions, find in a reasonable amount of time what password created this garbled mess of characters. Okay, so it's secure, but how on earth do we log Bob in? If next time he logs in and he gives us password 132 accidentally, how do we know from this mess that we have stored for Bob's password, how do we know that this is the wrong password? It's simple. We just run whatever Bob gives us through our magical one-way function, and then we check that the output of that matches whatever we have stored as Bob's password. So in this scenario, the output of password 132 is this garbled mess, which is actually very different from this garbled mess that we have recorded as Bob's password. Why do I do this to myself? These magical one-way functions I talk about are called cryptographic hash functions. Some examples of cryptographic hash functions are MD5, SHA-1, and SHA-256. I want to make more videos on this topic in the future, but in case someone watches this video and then doesn't watch the follow-ups or do any more research, I do want to point a few things out. For this list here, MD5 and versions of SHA-1 are considered no longer secure for cryptographic use. This idea of hashing a password, creating this long garbled mess that keeps me up at night, is theoretically secure with some large caveats. Even given that you're using a one-way function, there could still be a number of vulnerabilities possible. For example, birthday attacks or length extension attacks. The world's most secure, super magical, very much one-way, invulnerable mega function cannot protect you if your password is easily guessable. So to that end, like I said, I do want to make a follow-up video explaining password best practices in depth and why they're needed, but for now, I'll just put some guidelines up. I'll link resources down below to where I got them from, but off the top of my head right now, you want alphanumeric passwords, so numbers and alphabet. Also throwing in some special characters like a hashtag or %sign. All of this length beats complexity, meaning you could make it complex with a lot of different special characters, but if it's only 8 characters long, it's still easily crackable. I think the guidelines now are 16 characters. I'm not too sure. I'll put it up here. And then, if possible, using non-English words is preferable if you speak a second language. And like I said, even if you have a very long password that's 16 or 20 characters, that's an English word and is just that word from the dictionary, that is also not secure because dictionary attacks exist. I also feel like I had to state, I know this is a huge oversimplification and I just kind of threw away web and network security, so I will try and cover SSL and RSA in future videos. Alright, that's all I have for this video. As usual, if you found this mildly educational or mildly entertaining, please demolish that like button and consider subscribing. If you found an oversight or correction, please comment down below. If you want to let me know that someone other than my mom and dad are watching these videos, also leave a comment. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.